Hey everyone, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to be talking about a simple method to clarify vague product requests and waste less time on your product team. So I've now worked as a software engineer for 7 years across companies big and small, from banking to big tech to social media. In that time, I've worked with dozens of teams on thousands of features, bugs, and product requests. Now, one of the biggest problems I've observed is product teams spending a lot of time and effort on things that aren't that important. Ultimately, there's always more work to do than resources to do them. So spending time on things that aren't the most important is a really great way to ensure you never get to the important ones, and why I advise to always focus on impact. In this post, we'll explore a simple method I use to prevent one of the most common causes of this waste: misunderstanding the incoming request, which of course means you spin your wheels doing a lot of time and effort on something that never mattered, and therefore, no matter how much time and effort you put in, it's just not going to matter. So to start, let's align on some shared context and understanding that everything is a hypothesis. So every incoming product request, whether it's a feature, a bug, or a proposed long-term vision for a product or business or company, is a hypothesis about what the product is now, how it should work in the future, and why it's valuable to do that. And so here's some examples from different perspectives. So the customer or user has a hypothesis about what they want to do, how they believe they can do it better, and what your product can do to help them, and therefore why they hire your product in the first place. The customer-facing people, this could be like sales or support, or maybe it's someone on your product team, maybe a product manager, a user researcher, could be a founder. Whoever's like actually talking to the customer, but it's like part of your company, they're going to have a hypothesis about what the customer is trying to do, how the product currently works, and how they can evolve that product into something that works well for that customer, but also for the business. And if we continue further down the chain, we get to the product people. And this is going to be like the software engineers, the product managers, maybe the copywriters, whoever's actually building that tool, that product that the customer will use. And now the product people have a hypothesis about what the customer-facing people actually want, why they want it, and how they could build something to solve for it. And so the thing to call out here is that all of these are really just hypotheses. They aren't facts, as we don't actually have a way to prove these things yet. So we need to treat them as hypotheses, and that means these are things that we can and should test to see if they're true. Moreover, we can see how this chain of information passing quickly turns into a game of telephone, where one person starts by whispering a message X to their neighbor, and the message is passed all the way back to the originator, where they announce what the message is now versus the original. And spoiler alert, the end message is rarely the same as the original. Now this means that even if the originating hypothesis was mostly correct, by the time it reaches the product people actually fulfilling it, it's often morphed a bit from its original form. So how can we combat this and build better products? And I will note that often the originating hypothesis from the customer is actually not correct. And this is like outside the scope of this video, but I would really recommend the mom test to kind of understand this phenomenon and how you can deal with it. But this method will also help solve for some versions of this, though would still really recommend the mom test. Okay, so how are we going to deal with this? So clear hypotheses highlight unclear problems. So I can't guarantee anything about your outcomes. After all, these are all just hypotheses, and you've got to test those to determine whether they turn out to be true or not. But what I can offer is a better system for playing this game of telephone, so at least we're focused on the actual hypothesis, whether that's the problem or the incoming request, that the business cares about, rather than a morphed version that no one cares about, and therefore no amount of time or effort you put in will ever make it matter. And that system is to simply state your hypotheses clearly. What is the problem and who is having it? Why does this matter in the context of what the customer is doing and what the business wants? What are the proposed ideas for solving it, if any? Does that actually solve the problem? When we do this, we clearly extract the bits of information that most matter. We can then use this to check our own understanding of the hypothesis with those further up the information chain and those we collaborate with to validate early that this is an accurate representation of what we're thinking and whether it's true or false. And ideally, when you're going up the information chain, we're no longer playing telephone, but we actually go all the way back to the originator and just ask them, And this eliminates like most misunderstanding that can enter during this phase. But by also checking against those we're collaborating with, we can kind of get around some of these problems of, oh, the original hypothesis was actually wrong. So even if we understand exactly what they were saying and we get it completely right, it's possible that their hypothesis was missing information. And so it's our job to not only understand the hypothesis, but also to flesh it out and validate it and make it a better hypothesis to see if this is something worth working on. Now, the way I like to do this is like this. So when a request comes in, I like to frame it as a hypothesis and ask the requester if that's correct. If not, we should iterate on that till we get it right. And this often does require some extra iteration because maybe we're just missing some information in the original message that we need to work out. And it's also really nice because it makes the requester feel heard. So instead of someone just going off on a rant and giving a response to a request, at least you've made the requester feel heard. And so this is usually a good foundation to build those further conversations about impact and whether we should prioritize it and stuff like that, because they actually know that you understand what their issue is. Once we've iterated on that and gotten aligned on kind of the meaning and the purpose, we can go and validate it with available data and relevant stakeholders. So this is often like a request comes in and you're saying that a whole bunch of users are facing this problem. Can I find data that proves that? Can I find data that puts this relative to all of our users and how important this is? Can we get an example anecdote of someone doing this? Testimony from a customer. Can we validate this with whoever owns this product? Like, hey, is this a problem you know about? Things like that. By doing that, we're fleshing out this hypothesis now that we understand it to see if can we easily test if it's true or not here, and reform it to actually get at the core piece of truth. And so before building anything, I also like to do this. So let's say we're aligned on the hypothesis, we think it's true, we validate it and stuff. Now, as a builder, as a product team, you've got to go actually do this thing. Well, I think it's really important to frame this as a hypothesis and validate it against that hypothesis you had earlier. And so the hypothesis was, we got to solve this problem. Now make a hypothesis about your thing and how it's going to solve that problem so that we can actually test it. And then by doing this, we can kind of just quickly, easily check, does this make sense actually? And how are we going to know if it actually solved it? And this is kind of like an iterative process. So at every step of the way, as you're learning more about the context and the problem and solution, maybe by reading the code or running some experiments or trying to write a feature, maybe in your meetings with other people, other stakeholders, either on this project or different projects, as you learn more context, I think it's important to check back with this hypothesis because often you'll come up with new information or learn new things that cause a assumption that you had as part of this to be actually different. Maybe not totally wrong, but it may be different than you originally thought. And by doing this at each step of the way, we basically provide ourselves with a lightweight signal for verifying that we're on the course that we originally set out for. And then we can kind of course correct as we go to understand whether this is still important or not. And so, even at the end of the day, if the hypothesis turns out to be false, at least we were testing that hypothesis that we had, as opposed to the hundreds, millions, infinite different versions of the hypothesis that weren't actually what we meant. Okay, a template for clear hypotheses. So I do this a lot for every request that comes in, every bug and feature I'm building, and especially for large projects we're considering spending a lot of time and effort on because, the larger the project, the more people involved, the longer the timelines, the bigger the budgets, the worse it is that we're a few degrees off. And so it serves as a simple, effective way to ensure that everyone involved is aligned and highlight and call out any mismatches early. When I first started doing this, I was often surprised at the fundamental mismatches it uncovered, from context around what the customer is actually doing or how the business works to base assumptions about how the product actually works. And the earlier you can do this, the less time you're, spending on spinning your wheels. Also, as an aside, me as a software engineer, I find having a clear hypothesis really helps with context switching because it provides everything you need to know to reload the context in which you're working. And I kind of find that even having this at the top of a pull request of why does this pull request exist? How does it kind of ladder up into the thing it's trying to do is really important. Both for you, the builder, to make sure it actually makes sense, and also for reviewers to easily come in, see what's going on and be able to verify and validate whether this makes sense or not. So use this basically for everything I'm trying to do. And so the template I use is pretty simple, and I've tweaked it over years of use to be as clear and concise as possible while covering the primary areas of misunderstanding that I've seen. So for small bugs and features, you may just have one sentence per item because it's just small. You don't need that to know that much. But for larger projects, especially ones months, years kinds of things. Often this will be a little bit larger. So you'll have just more information in there, maybe more bullet points with links so that you can kind of fully capture the necessary context. And so here it is. It really is very simple. So basically at the top, we've just got TLDR, which is basically just a short, summary, one sentence, hopefully maybe two, of what you're doing and how this is going to be impactful. And this is really good for giving people an idea who just want to skim. And most people just want to skim things. And so just providing this at the top is like, this is the most important thing. If you only see one thing, this is it. And that's really helpful. The next is context. So basically problems only exist within a given context. Like if we're finding like connection issues for some sort of like, I don't know, Wi-Fi or internet, like the context really matters. Like, is this a connection issue in a hospital? So it's like life or death. Or is this a connection issue on my like social media or like my mobile phone game? So it's just like an annoyance. It's really important to have context so that people can understand how the problem happens. And also oftentimes understand whether this problem actually matters or not, because depending on the context, there might just be an easy way to solve this, or this is like a non-problem that just kind of like occurred. So context really important for setting the stage. And so if you can, in this case, also give like what the people are trying to do and why with the context, then the problem here becomes a lot clearer of the problem that people are facing in this context is this thing. And so we can kind of validate like, okay, we actually understand what the problem is because we've uniquely identified it within this context. And then, as I was mentioning, we can then verify whether this is really a problem or if this is like a feature and they're using the thing wrong. So that's really important. The next one is impact. So we talk about focus on impact a lot. Like a lot of things, and the mom test talks about this a lot, is like people have a lot of problems, but a lot of times like it's just not useful. And so by understanding the impact, this is how we're able to, validate like, okay, this is a true hypothesis, it exists, but like, do we care? And oftentimes we just don't care. It's just too small to work on. It's just not the most important thing. But it's really important to have the impact here. And I really like to have data or links to data here. So that we can quickly at a glance, compare two things and kind of understand what is most important to work on. And the final thing is solutions. And you'll notice that this is multiple. And I think this is this is good because there's never one way to solve things. And usually the first idea you have for how to solve things is not the best way. And so what I like to try to do is come up with like 3 different ways of how to solve the thing. Obviously, if it's like a very small bug, like you might not need to do this. Maybe just 1, maybe 2 is fine. But definitely for big projects, try to come up with like at least 3 different ways to solve this and kind of do the pros and cons of each of them before picking the best one, because often there's actually another one, a 4th or more solution that's the best that actually combines the best of each of these. And so I find this is really a great way to spend a little bit more time thinking about it before you go forward, but get like way better results out of it. And so that's it. That's how I clarify all incoming product requests to ensure that I understand what the actual problem is and we're all on the same page with respect to how impactful it is and how we want to go about solving it. It may seem a little robotic to do this at first, but it becomes a lot more natural when you kind of put it into your own words and kind of internalize the things that you're missing from this. And I'm confident that you'll uncover some surprisingly fundamental miscommunications after using this a few times. And it really comes back to this game of telephone. Like nobody means to be wrong. Everyone's trying to do the right thing. We just miscommunicate when we have chains of information like this. And so all we're doing is we're trusting people, but then we're just verifying the thing. And I think that's the way to think about this. Like we're trying to help everyone by just double checking our numbers. That's all we're doing. So if you like this post, you might also like stop wasting your time on bad startup ideas. 3 tips to be an effective software engineer with less work and more fun. And also Instagram's tech stack will surprise you with a list of things that I found surprising and thought other people would based on kind of false assumptions people have about how big tech works or tech works at scale. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.